Commander Thelvac stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the viewing screen that showed the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. 847 warships floated in perfect formation across the dark expanse of space. Ships from 3 different empires, ancient enemies who had fought each other for thousands of years, now united for a single purpose. The Kethral Dominion contributed 300 vessels, each one bristling with plasma cannons and energy shields that could withstand the heat of a star. The Ascendant Collective brought 290 ships equipped with graviton weapons, capable of crushing planets. The Vryn Empire added the rest, sleek predators armed with biological warfare systems that had wiped out entire civilizations. Thelvac had commanded fleets before. He had conquered 12 star systems in his career. He had reduced rebellious worlds to ash and accepted the surrender of countless species. But never had he seen such overwhelming power gathered in one place. It made him uneasy. His second officer approached, her scales rippling with excitement. "Commander, all task forces report ready. The target system lies 3 light jumps ahead. Shall I give the order to proceed?" Thelvac looked at the intelligence reports displayed on his console. The target was a small yellow star with 8 planets, unremarkable in every way. The 3rd planet was the one that mattered. They called it Earth. The humans had only been in space for barely 2 centuries. Their fastest ships limped along at speeds that made Thelvac want to laugh. They had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no antimatter drives. Their largest military vessels were primitive constructs of metal and chemical fuel. According to the scouts, human technology was at least 500 years behind the galactic standard. So why did it take 3 empires to deal with them? The answer lay in what happened 3 months ago. A human exploration ship had stumbled upon a Kethral mining operation on a contested asteroid field. Standard protocol was simple. The Kethral destroyer on patrol ordered the human vessel to surrender and prepare to be boarded. Mining rights belonged to whoever claimed them first. And the Kethral had been there for weeks. The humans refused. The destroyer captain, annoyed but not particularly concerned, armed his weapons and repeated the demand. The human ship was barely the size of a Kethral shuttle. 1 shot would vaporize it. The captain expected immediate compliance. Instead, the humans transmitted a single word. Every translation matrix in the Kethral fleet rendered it the same way, regardless of language or context. The word was simple and clear. No. Then the human ship opened fire. What happened next should have been impossible. The human vessel had no business surviving against a Kethral destroyer. Its weapons were chemical rockets and primitive lasers. Its hull was thin metal that should have melted under the first plasma burst. Yet somehow, through a combination of desperate maneuvering and what the Kethral captain later described as insane tactics, the human ship survived long enough to escape into a nearby debris field. The destroyer gave chase but lost the human vessel in the asteroid clusters. When reinforcements arrived, the humans were gone, vanished back to their home system. The incident report reached the Dominion High Command within days. At first, the leadership dismissed it. One lucky escape meant nothing. But then the intelligence analysts began digging deeper into human history, examining the radio broadcast Earth had been sending into space for decades. What they found disturbed the Council enough to call for an emergency meeting with the other galactic powers. Humans were warriors, not soldiers trained for conquest like the Kethral, not strategic thinkers like the Collective, not calculated exterminators like the Vryn. Humans were survivors who had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting everything, including themselves. Their own planet had tried to kill them with ice ages, supervolcanoes, and extinction events. They survived. Predators hunted them. They hunted back. Disease ravaged their populations. They developed medicine. They fought wars against each other that killed millions, then rebuilt and grew stronger. Every time something tried to destroy humanity, they adapted and persevered. The Council realized the danger. If humans believed they could say no to galactic powers and survive, other species might get the same idea. The 3 empires controlled over 6,000 worlds between them. Most had been conquered. Many were held through fear and overwhelming military superiority. If subject species saw humans defying the galaxy's greatest powers, rebellion would spread like wildfire. The decision was unanimous. Humanity had to be crushed immediately and completely. An example had to be made. The message must be clear to every species in known space. Defiance equals extinction. That was why Thelvac commanded the largest fleet ever assembled. They would jump into Earth's solar system, destroy every human military installation, and force unconditional surrender. If the humans refused, orbital bombardment would begin. 3 empires' worth of firepower would turn Earth's surface into molten glass. It should take less than a day. "All ships report ready, Commander," his second officer announced. "Waiting for your order." Thelvax took one last look at the tactical display. 847 warships against a primitive species that barely had colonies on their own moon. The odds were so overwhelmingly in his favor that this wasn't even a battle. It was an execution. "All vessels prepare for jump," he commanded. "Set coordinates for the human home system. We proceed in 3 waves. Maximum intimidation formation. Let them see what true power looks like before we destroy them." The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency. Energy readings spiked as the massive ships charged their jump drives. Reality began to bend around the fleet as they prepared to tear holes through space itself. Thelvax felt a strange sensation in his gut. Not fear, certainly. He had fought in dozens of campaigns. But something felt wrong about this mission. An instinct honed over years of combat whispered warnings he couldn't quite understand. He ignored it. Instincts were for survival situations. This was a massacre. "Jump in 10 seconds, announced the navigation officer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, jump, base twisted. Light bent. The fleet vanished from the Velcor expanse and reappeared 8 light-years away, on the edge of a small solar system dominated by a yellow star. Earth's sun blazed before them, and the fleet's sensors immediately began scanning for targets. What they found made Thelvax's blood run cold. Earth's moon was moving. The sensor officer stared at her display, checking and rechecking the readings. Her voice came out uncertain, almost frightened. "Commander, the natural satellite orbiting Earth is accelerating toward our position. Current speed is increasing beyond what gravitational forces should allow." Thelvax leaned forward, his claws gripping the command chair. "Explain. Moons don't move on their own." "Sir, deep scan results are coming through now." The officer's scales paled to a sickly gray color. "The object we cataloged as Luna shows massive internal structures. The entire satellite has been hollowed out and reinforced with materials our sensors barely recognize. It's not a moon anymore, Commander. It's a weapons platform." Before Thelvax could respond, alarms shrieked across the bridge. The tactical display lit up with new contacts, hundreds of them appearing simultaneously across the solar system. "Sir, Mars is powering up. The planet is covered in military installations. Energy signatures match nothing in our database, but the power readings are off the scale." Another officer shouted over the chaos. "Asteroid belt contacts!" Thousands of objects we scanned as debris are activating. "They're ships, Commander. Disguised ships. Every one of them is a missile platform." Thelvax felt reality shift beneath him. The entire mission brief had been wrong. Earth wasn't a primitive world with basic defenses. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a trap, and the combined fleet had flown right into it. "All ships, battle formation Delta 9. Spread out immediately," he commanded. But even as he spoke, he knew they had entered the system too clustered, too confident. His formation was designed for intimidation, not combat. The ships were packed together to present an overwhelming show of force. That formation was now a weakness. "Commander, receiving transmission from Jupiter." The communications officer looked confused. "Sir, Jupiter itself is transmitting. The gas giant's great red spot is opening up." On the main screen, the massive storm that had raged on Jupiter for centuries suddenly unfurled like a mechanical flower. Beneath it lay a structure so immense it made the assembled fleet look like insects. A megastructure built inside the gas giant, hidden from scanners by the planet's own magnetic field and atmospheric interference. "Saturn's rings are active," another voice reported. "Hidden railgun batteries, thousands of them. They're targeting our fleet." The communication channels exploded with chatter from other ships. Vryn captains demanded explanations. Collective admirals called for immediate withdrawal. Kethral commanders tried to maintain formation even as their sensors told them they were surrounded. Then every scanner in the fleet caught the same transmission. It broadcast on every known frequency, translated simultaneously into every galactic language through a method that suggested the humans had cracked universal communication protocols. The transmission was simple. Just one word, but it carried the weight of absolute defiance and deadly promise. "Earth." The humans opened fire first. The attack came from everywhere at once. Luna's surface erupted with launch bays, sending thousands of missiles screaming toward the fleet. Mars turned its entire face toward the invaders, and weapons that shouldn't exist in human hands began firing. The disguised ships in the asteroid belt unleashed salvos of railgun rounds that moved at percentages of light speed. The elegant plasma weapons of the galactic empires were energy efficient and precise. Human weapons were crude, wasteful, and terrifyingly effective. Nuclear warheads detonated in clusters, creating fields of radiation and shrapnel. Kinetic projectiles punched through shields designed to stop energy weapons. Chemical lasers, primitive by galactic standards, fired in such massive volleys that they overwhelmed heat dissipation systems. A Vryn dreadnought exploded as a railgun round pierced its reactor. The blast took out 3 nearby frigates. A collective cruiser tried to raise its graviton shields but was hit by a swarm of missiles that struck from 6 different angles simultaneously. Kethril destroyers fired back with plasma cannons, scoring hits on human platforms only to watch as automated systems simply jettisoned damaged sections and kept fighting. They're not using manned stations, Thelvax realized. Most of their platforms are automated or remotely controlled. They're sacrificing hardware while preserving their people. It was a strategy no galactic power used. Ships were expensive, but trained crews were replaceable. The humans had reversed the equation. They threw away machinery like it meant nothing while keeping their personnel safely away from danger. The battle became chaos. The fleet's careful formations shattered as ships desperately tried to maneuver. But the humans knew every centimeter of their solar system. They used gravity wells as weapons, slingshotting projectiles around planets to hit ships from unexpected angles. They hid weapons platforms in the sun's corona where scanners couldn't penetrate. They turned satellites, space stations, and even old defunct probes into improvised weapons. A wing of Kethril fighters chased what they thought was a retreating human vessel, only to follow it into a debris field that suddenly exploded. Proximity mines, thousands of them, hidden among the wreckage of humanity's own discarded spacecraft. Thelvax watched his tactical display with growing horror as red icons proliferated across the screen. Each one represented a destroyed or crippled vessel from the combined fleet. The casualty count climbed toward numbers that should have been impossible. "Sir, we've lost communication with the third wave," his communications officer reported. "Some kind of interference is jamming our FTL transmitters. We can't coordinate with the outer ships, and we can't call for reinforcements." That was when Thelvax understood the full depth of the trap. The humans hadn't just fortified their system, they had turned it into a prison. The fleet couldn't call for help, couldn't warn their homeworlds, couldn't even maintain proper coordination between task forces. Every ship was fighting blind, cut off from the command structure that made the galactic empires so effective. "All ships, fall back to the jump point," Thelvax commanded. "Fighting retreat, maximum speed." But the orders came too late. The humans had positioned their forces knowing exactly where the fleet would try to retreat. The jump point was covered by overlapping fields of fire from multiple directions. Ships that tried to flee ran into killing zones where human weapons waited in ambush. A collective admiral broadcast on the emergency channel, his voice breaking with panic. "We've lost 40% of our task force. Request immediate withdrawal authority." Other commanders echoed the call. The disciplined, conquering fleets of 3 galactic empires were on the verge of routing. Many ships were already breaking formation, trying to escape the slaughter. Thelvax's console beeped with an incoming transmission on a secure channel, directly to his command station. He hesitated, then accepted it. A human appeared on his screen. Not a soldier in armor, not a warrior covered in battle scars. An elderly female wearing simple civilian clothes, sitting in what appeared to be a comfortable office. She smiled at him, and somehow that smile was more terrifying than any weapon. "Commander Thelvax of the Kethril Dominion," she said, her words translated perfectly into his language. "My name is Ambassador Chen. We need to talk about your future because right now you don't have one." Thelvax stared at the human woman on his screen. Around him, the bridge continued its controlled chaos as officers tried to coordinate a retreat that was quickly becoming a disaster. But something about the calm way this Ambassador Chen looked at him made Thelvax hold up his hand for silence. "You speak as if you have already won this battle," he said carefully. "Your platforms are taking damage. Your defenses won't hold forever." Ambassador Chen tilted her head slightly and her smile never wavered. "Commander, do you know what we call this engagement in our strategic planning? Operation Doorstep, because you came to our doorstep expecting us to be helpless. Let me tell you what's really happening out there. She tapped something outside of the camera's view, and tactical data appeared on Thelvax's console. Human tactical data, showing the battle from Earth's perspective. The detail was horrifying. They were tracking every ship in his fleet individually, predicting movement patterns, calculating optimal firing solutions. The humans weren't fighting desperately. They were fighting with precision. You've lost 62% of your fleet strength, Chen continued. We've lost approximately 8% of our defensive platforms. Most of those losses were deliberate sacrifices to draw your ships into kill zones. The platforms you destroyed were mostly automated and already scheduled for replacement. We lose machinery. You lose trained personnel who took decades to reach their current skill level. Thelvax felt his stomach twist. She was right. Every ship they lost represented not just hardware, but crews, officers, specialists, resources that took years to replace. You're not the first to come here, Commander, Chen said, and her voice took on a harder edge. 40 years ago, the Brenthi Confederacy sent scouts to our system. They observed us from the outer planets, watching what they thought was a primitive species, stumbling through its first attempts at spaceflight. They made plans for our conquest. They calculated our worth as a slave species. She paused, letting that sink in. Thelvax had never heard of the Brenthi Confederacy, which itself was telling. Galactic powers didn't just vanish. We captured their scouts, Chen continued. Every single one. We learned their language. We studied their technology. We understood their culture and their methods. Then we let them go. We sent them home with a message. Earth is not interested in galactic politics, but Earth will defend itself with absolute commitment. The Brenthi didn't believe us. 6 months later, they sent a conquest fleet, 200 ships, which I'm told was quite impressive for their civilization. Chen's expression hardened. Those ships never returned home. The Confederacy collapsed within a decade, not from our attacks, but because they lost so much military strength that their subject species successfully rebelled. Thelvax accessed his historical databases, searching for references to the Brenthi. He found scattered mentions, fragments of data about a mid-level power that had mysteriously fallen apart around the time humans achieved faster-than-light travel. The timeline matched exactly. We've been preparing for you for 40 years, Chen said. Every ship you scouted making clumsy patrols around our colonies was a decoy. Every primitive defense satellite you tracked was obsolete hardware we left in place to maintain the illusion. The real Earth, the one that survived ice ages and world wars and near extinctions, doesn't advertise its strength. We let others make assumptions. Those assumptions become their downfall. On Thelvax's tactical display, another Vryn cruiser winked out of existence, destroyed by a coordinated strike from 3 different human platforms. The casualty reports were becoming unbearable. You have 2 choices now, Ambassador Chen said, and despite her calm tone, Thelvax heard steel underneath. Choice 1, you continue fighting. Your fleet has enough firepower to damage our platform significantly. You might even manage to launch missiles at Earth itself before we stop you. Some of them might get through. You could kill millions of our people. She leaned forward slightly. And in return, we will destroy every single ship in your fleet. Not one will escape. We've calculated acceptable losses, Commander. We've done the math. We'll survive. You won't. 3 galactic empires will lose the largest military force they've ever assembled, and they'll lose it because they underestimated a species they thought was primitive. What's the second choice? Thelvax asked, though he already knew. Ceasefire. Immediate cessation of all hostilities. Acknowledge Earth's sovereignty and withdraw your forces to a neutral position. Then we talk. We negotiate. We establish terms that let everyone survive this disaster you walked into. Chen's expression softened slightly. We didn't want this war, Commander. We never fired the first shot in our history when we had a choice, but we will finish every fight that comes to our home. Thelvax looked at his officers. They were Kethril, trained from birth to conquer and dominate. Retreat was disgraceful. Surrender to a primitive species would be worse than death in the eyes of their culture. But they were also intelligent enough to recognize impossible situations. His second officer met his eyes. She had survived a dozen campaigns under his command. Her scales showed the scars of combat on 6 different worlds. She gave him a single slight nod. If I order ceasefire, Thelvax said slowly, will the other empires follow? They're waiting for someone to give them permission to survive, Chen replied. The collective has already sent back-channel communications requesting terms. The Vrin are too proud to ask, but their ships are already moving toward retreat vectors. You're the senior commander here, Thelvax. The decision is yours, but make it quickly. Every minute you delay, more of your people die needlessly. Thelvax had commanded fleets for 30 years. He had won battles that military academies still studied. He had received honors from the Dominion's highest councils. His career had been built on victory after victory against every enemy he faced. Now he had to make the hardest decision a commander could face. Admit defeat to save his people. All ships, he broadcast on the fleet-wide channel, cease fire immediately. All vessels fall back to designated coordinates and hold position. This is a direct order from Fleet Command. The bridge fell silent. In the moments after his command, Thelvax waited to see if his orders would be followed or if proud captains would refuse to retreat. One by one, the ships complied. Kethral vessels powered down their weapons. Collective cruisers broke off their attacks. Even the Vrin, who had never retreated in living memory, slowly disengaged from combat. The human platforms stopped firing. The sudden silence after so much chaos was deafening. Thelvax watched his tactical display as both fleets held position, weapon systems cooling, damage control teams rushing to save dying ships. Ambassador Chen smiled again, but this time there was genuine warmth in it. Thank you, Commander. You just saved thousands of lives on both sides. Now we can talk like civilized beings. You offer mercy to those who came to destroy you? Thelvax asked, genuinely confused. We offer mercy because we understand what you don't yet, Chen replied. Survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about being strong enough to protect what matters, then being wise enough to make peace. You're about to learn that lesson, Commander. The question is whether the rest of the galaxy learns it with you, or has to discover it the hard way. New coordinates appeared on Thelvax's console. Medical facilities, rescue ships, negotiation zones. The species that had just devastated the galaxy's finest fleet was now offering humanitarian aid to the survivors. Thelvax realized he had just witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans fighting like cornered animals, then extending hands in peace the moment the threat ended. It terrified him more than the battle had. 3 weeks after the battle, Thelvax found himself sitting in a conference room in Geneva, Earth. The journey from warrior to diplomat still felt unreal to him. His flagship had limped back to Kethral space with 40% casualties and enough damage that repairs would take months. The Dominion High Command had been furious, but they couldn't punish him for losing a battle they had ordered him to fight. Instead, they sent him back to Earth as their official representative in the peace negotiations. If the talks failed and war resumed, Thelvax would be the convenient scapegoat. If they succeeded, the Council could claim they had wisely chosen him for his diplomatic skills. The conference room itself was strange. Humans conducted their negotiations in a place filled with historical meaning. The walls displayed photographs from something called the United Nations, an organization where human nations had gathered after their worst wars to prevent future conflicts. Thelvax had studied human history during the journey back to Earth. What he learned disturbed him deeply. Humans had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times. They had fought wars that killed millions of their own kind. They had developed weapons capable of ending all life on their planet. Yet somehow they had survived, learned, and united. The very room he sat in represented that transformation. Ambassador Chen sat across from him, flanked by representatives from various human governments and military branches. Around the large circular table sat delegates from the Kethral Dominion, the Ascendant Collective, and the Vrin Empire. Former enemies, now forced to negotiate together because a species they had dismissed as primitive had defeated them all. Let's begin, Chen said, activating a holographic display in the center of the table. Before we discuss terms, I want everyone to understand what we've been doing while your fleets were regrouping. The display showed star maps, data streams, and surveillance footage. Thelvax felt his blood chill as he realized what he was seeing. These are records of Kethral slave worlds, Chen said calmly, highlighting several star systems. 43 planets where conquered species are forced to work in mining operations, manufacturing facilities, and agricultural centers. Conditions include 16-hour workdays, minimal nutrition, and life expectancies 40% below the species' natural average. She switched the display. This is collective territory, evidence of genocide against the Tharni people who refused cultural assimilation. Approximately 2 billion individuals were systematically eliminated over a 15-year period. The collective's official records list the cause as disease outbreak, but we've recovered communications proving it was deliberate biological warfare. The collective representative started to protest, but Chen cut him off with a gesture. And the Vrin Empire, she continued, bringing up more data. We've documented 71 separate incidents of planetary bombardment against civilian populations. Not military targets, civilians. The stated purpose in your own military logs is deterrence through fear. You've killed over 12 billion sentient beings to maintain control over your territory. The room fell silent. Every piece of evidence was carefully documented, cross-referenced, and verified. The humans had been collecting data for decades, preparing for this moment. Why do you show us this? The Vrin ambassador finally asked. You plan to use it as propaganda against us? No, Chen replied. I'm showing you this because we need everyone at this table to understand something fundamental. Earth isn't interested in being another galactic power playing the same games you've played for millennia. We're offering you something different, but it requires honesty about who we all are. She deactivated the display and looked at each delegate in turn. Humans have committed atrocities too. We've enslaved our own kind. We've committed genocide. We've used weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations. The difference is that we kept the records. We built monuments to our victims. We taught our children about our mistakes so they would never repeat them. Chen pulled up images of memorials, museums, and historical sites on Earth, places dedicated to remembering humanity's darkest moments. Can any of you say the same? She asked. Do the Kethril teach their children about the species they've enslaved? Do the collective remember the civilizations they've erased? Do the Vrin honor the billions they've killed? The silence that followed was answer enough. Here are our terms, Chen said, distributing data tablets to each delegate. First, Earth and all human colonies are recognized as sovereign territory. Any military incursion is an automatic act of war, and we've proven we can win that war on our home ground. Second, Earth will not join any existing power bloc. We trade with everyone, fight with no one unless attacked. Third, all slave species under Kethril control are to be released and given the option of independence or protected status. Impossible, the Kethril representative sputtered. Our economy depends on those labor forces. Then your economy needs to change, Chen replied without sympathy. Fourth term, no more genocidal campaigns. The collective will cease all extermination policies and allow cultural diversity in their territories. Fifth term, the Vrin will implement proportional response doctrine. Military action only against military targets, with civilian casualties treated as war crimes. You demand we restructure our entire civilizations. The Vrin ambassador protested. Yes, Chen said simply. Because we're also offering defensive pacts to any species you threaten. Earth will become the galaxy's neutral arbiter. Any species facing extinction can appeal to us for protection. And we've proven we can provide that protection. Thelvac studied the terms carefully. They were harsh but not impossible. The real genius was in the final clause. You're creating a balance of power, he said slowly. The three empires maintain their territories, but they can't expand anymore because smaller species will have Earth backing them up. We become locked in a stalemate. A peaceful stalemate, Chen corrected. Your empires survive. Your people aren't harmed. You just stop harming others. In return, Earth provides technology sharing, medical advances, and cultural exchange. We've developed things in our isolation that you've never considered. Imagine what we could accomplish together instead of in opposition. The collective representative leaned forward. And if we refuse these terms? Then we remain in our system, you remain in yours, and we have no relationship at all, Chen said. Earth doesn't need the galaxy. We're self-sufficient. But isolated empires tend to stagnate while isolated Earth continues advancing. In 50 years, maybe 100, we'll spread beyond our system with technology you can't match. Then you'll face a human civilization that's even stronger and has even less reason to show mercy. It was a threat wrapped in reason. Accept terms now while Earth was offering them, or face worse conditions later when humanity held all the advantages. I need to consult with my government, the Kethril representative said. As do I, added the collective delegate. We all do, Thelvax agreed. But Ambassador Chen, I have a question that's been troubling me. Why did you show mercy? Your platforms could have destroyed our fleet completely. Why offer rescue and negotiation? Chen's expression softened. She stood and walked to one of the historical photographs on the wall. It showed ruins, devastation, and human faces filled with grief. This was taken after one of our worst wars, she said quietly. We had the weapons to destroy ourselves completely. We came very close to using them. But we didn't, because enough people chose survival over victory. We learned that being strong isn't about defeating every enemy. It's about being strong enough to protect what matters and wise enough to make peace. She turned back to face the delegates. We showed mercy because we've been where you are. Powerful, arrogant, certain of our superiority. That path leads to extinction. We're offering you the shortcut we paid for in billions of human lives over thousands of years of warfare. Learn from our mistakes instead of repeating them. Thelvax looked at the other delegates and saw the same realization on their faces. Humanity wasn't just offering terms. They were offering evolution beyond the endless cycle of conquest and domination that had defined galactic politics. Since the first species reached the stars, the question was whether the galaxy's powers were wise enough to accept it. I will recommend my government accept these terms, Thelvax said formally. The alternative is worse for everyone. One by one, the other delegates nodded agreement. The negotiations would continue for weeks, but the fundamental decision had been made. Earth had won more than a battle. They had won the future. He gestured at the tactical displays. Ambassador Chen is right. The age of conquest is over because the cost has become too high. Any species that implements this defensive doctrine becomes impossible to conquer without committing resources that leave the attacker vulnerable. The three old powers can't expand anymore without destroying themselves. The stalemate is permanent. So we adapt or become irrelevant, a collective commander added. Is that the choice? No, Thelvax said. The choice is whether we adapt willingly and benefit from cooperation, or resist and fall behind while other species advance. I've seen the cultural changes happening in my own civilization. Young Kethrol are asking why we need an empire. They're questioning traditions that have stood for thousands of years. That change is happening whether the councils approve or not. The conference lasted 3 days. By the end, 40 species signed the charter for the Galactic Defense Coalition. The three old powers didn't join, but they didn't oppose it either. They couldn't, because their own subject species were watching, and suppression would trigger rebellions they no longer had the strength to contain. On the final day, Thelvax found himself standing with Ambassador Chen on a balcony overlooking the city. Human civilization spread out before them, vibrant and chaotic and alive in ways Kethrol's cities never felt. What happens now, he asked. The galaxy is changing faster than anyone can control. Now we see if sentient life can learn to survive itself, Chen replied. Earth bought billions of years of evolution fighting every threat our planet could throw at us. Then we nearly destroyed ourselves with our own weapons. We survived by choosing cooperation over domination. Now we're giving the galaxy the same choice. Many won't accept it, Thelvax warned. I know, Chen said sadly. Some species will cling to the old ways until they destroy themselves. But enough will adapt, enough will choose survival. And over time, the galaxy will transform into something better than an endless cycle of conquest and suffering. Thelvax thought about his own people, the younger generations questioning traditions, demanding change. He thought about the slave species now free, building their own civilizations. He thought about the entire galaxy slowly shifting toward a new understanding of power and peace. It all started with one human ship refusing to surrender, he said quietly. One word transmitted into space, no, and everything changed. That's how all great changes begin, Chen replied. One person or one species deciding they've had enough of the old ways. Then others follow until the change becomes inevitable. Humans said no to being conquered. Now dozens of species are saying the same thing. The word spreads like fire, Commander, and fire transforms everything it touches. Thelvax looked up at the stars, visible even through Earth's atmosphere. Somewhere out there, his people were changing. The Dominion's rigid hierarchy was cracking as new ideas spread. The galaxy's old powers were learning to adapt or face irrelevance. And humanity, the species that refused to kneel, had become the catalyst for transformation spanning thousands of light years. All because they opened fire when threatened and transmitted one simple word, Earth, the word that changed everything. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Sol, and Thelvax barely recognized the galaxy he had known all his life. He stood in his quarters aboard a transport ship heading back to Earth, watching news feeds from across known space. Every screen told the same story in different ways. The old order was dying, and humanity had killed it with a single battle and a few simple demands. The Kethral Dominion had released 17 slave species in the first 3 months after the treaty. Not because the Council suddenly developed compassion, but because those species declared independence and Earth publicly backed their claim. When the Dominion sent fleets to reclaim their property, human ships appeared in orbit above the rebel worlds. The resulting standoffs ended the same way every time. Kethral forces withdrew rather than face another devastating engagement. Thelvax had been recalled to the homeworld after the third incident. His superiors wanted him court-martialed for cowardice. Fleet commanders refused to authorize it. The tactical analysis was clear in every report. Fighting Earth in a defensive position was suicide. Humanity had spent 6 more months fortifying their colonies and spreading their defensive doctrine to allied species. Another assault on human territory would require resources that would leave the Dominion vulnerable to the collective and the Vryn. That their permanent stalemate had become official policy across all 3 empires, but the real changes were happening in ways the councils couldn't control. Thelvax cycled through entertainment channels and saw human music broadcasts being received across 24 star systems. Young Kethral were listening to something called rock music and asking uncomfortable questions about individual freedom. Human literature was spreading through digital networks faster than censors could block it. Concepts like democracy and civil rights were being discussed in universities on worlds that had never questioned imperial authority. The Dominion's propaganda ministry tried to counter the trend by highlighting human failures and wars. It backfired. Young people saw that humans had fought and killed each other for stupid reasons, then learned from their mistakes and built something better. If humans could transform from scattered warring tribes to a unified civilization, why couldn't the Kethral? Thelvax's personal communicator chimed. Another message from Ambassador Chen. She had been sending him regular communications since the treaty signing, and he had gradually begun to consider her something close to a friend. An unlikely development for a warrior who had spent his career conquering others. Commander Thelvax, the message began, and he could hear the smile in her voice even through the audio recording. I'm reaching out with a personal invitation. Earth is hosting a conference on mutual defense and shared security concerns. We're inviting military leaders from across the galaxy, people who understand the strategic reality of modern interstellar politics. Your name is at the top of our list. Will you attend? The message included coordinates and dates. Thelvax checked the guest list and felt surprise spike through him. Commanders from 40 different species, including his former enemies from the Collective and the Vryn. Leaders who had fought each other for decades, now gathering on Earth to discuss cooperation. He accepted the invitation immediately. 2 weeks later, Thelvax found himself back in Geneva, but this time in a much larger conference center. The gathering included over 200 military officers representing species from across the galaxy. He recognized combat veterans from a dozen different wars, admirals who had destroyed entire fleets, tactical geniuses who were legends in their own civilizations. They all shared one thing in common. They had been smart enough to recognize when the nature of warfare changed. Ambassador Chen opened the conference with a presentation that shocked everyone in attendance. She showed detailed analysis of what Earth called the Defensive Revolution, a complete restructuring of military doctrine that made conquest nearly impossible for any species willing to implement. Its traditional galactic warfare depends on force projection, Chen explained, displaying tactical models. Powerful species maintain large fleets that can strike anywhere in their territory. They conquer worlds through overwhelming firepower and hold them through the threat of orbital bombardment. This worked for thousands of years because most species couldn't afford the resources to defend every planet adequately. She changed the display to show Earth's solar system defense network. We changed the equation. Instead of building fleets to project power, we built integrated defense systems that make attacking us impossibly expensive. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid in our space is part of one massive weapons network. The cost to build it was enormous, but the cost to defeat it is higher. We proved that in our engagement with the combined fleet. Thelvax watched as dozens of officers leaned forward, suddenly understanding the implications. Now we're offering this doctrine to any species that wants it, Chen continued. Earth will provide tactical training, technology sharing, and defensive support. In return, we ask for three things: no aggressive conquest, no genocide, and membership in what we're calling the Galactic Defense Coalition, a mutual defense pact where members agree to protect each other if attacked. The room erupted in discussion. A Vrin admiral stood up, his species equivalent of skepticism showing in his posture. You're trying to remake the galaxy in your image. You want every species to adopt human values and human methods. No, Chen replied firmly. We're offering a galaxy where every species can survive without constant fear. Your cultures remain your own. Your governments stay independent. The only thing that changes is that you stop trying to conquer your neighbors, and your neighbors stop trying to conquer you. Is that really so terrible? It's idealistic, the Vrin admiral countered. Species compete for resources. Conflict is inevitable. Conflict, yes, Chen agreed. War, no. Humans compete with each other constantly. Our corporations battle for markets. Our nations argue over policies. Our people disagree about everything. But we learn to resolve conflicts without killing millions. You can too. Thelvax stood up, surprising himself. Every eye in the room turned toward him. I fought against Earth, he said quietly. I commanded the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. I expected easy victory against a primitive species. Instead, I watched humanity dismantle everything I thought I knew about warfare. They didn't just defeat us with superior technology. They defeated us with superior thinking.